The first time I saw him, I knew I was in trouble. Not in an obvious, life-altering way. No dramatic music, no sudden realization. Just a quiet, unsettling awareness that crept under my skin and refused to leave. The kind that sneaks up on you, builds over time, and settles in your chest before you're ready to face it. And now, thanks to Jasper, I'd be stuck with him for a whole damn week. Eli, seriously, stop making that face. My dad isn't gonna bite. Jasper leaned against the truck, arms crossed, wearing his usual exasperated look, the one he reserved for me whenever I resisted his questionable life decisions. I huffed, tightening my grip on my bag. I'm not making a face. Yes, you are. Though I'm internally debating if I should run face. I wasn't going to run, but I was internally debating a lot of things. Because his dad wasn't just anyone. He was Nathaniel Cole, 45, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who made simple movements look effortlessly strong. He had a way of carrying himself, this quiet self-assurance, like he could fix anything just by being there. And then there were his eyes, sharp, unreadable, knowing. The worst part? He had no idea what he did to me. Eli, Jasper sighed, pushing off the truck. Come on, my dad needs the help. You're good at fixing stuff, and I know you don't have anything better to do over break. He had a point. I could either spend the week avoiding my unfinished thesis, or I could spend it at a lakeside cabin, pretending I wasn't hyper-aware of my best friend's ridiculously attractive father. Before I could overthink it, the cabin door opened. Heavy boots thudded against the wooden porch. And then there he was, Nathaniel Cole. His gaze swept over the driveway, landing on us. On me. My breath hitched, just slightly, and I hated myself for it. Jasper. His voice was steady, familiar. Then his eyes flicked to me. Eli. I swallowed. Hey, Mr. Cole. A flicker of something passed through his expression. Curiosity, maybe, but it was gone before I could read it. You boys ready to work? Jasper groaned. Already. Nathaniel smirked, eyes crinkling at the edges. The dock's not going to fix itself. I was screwed. Jasper and I had been friends since our first year of college, bonded by mutual procrastination, late-night fast food runs, and the unspoken rule that whoever lost at Mario Kart had to buy coffee the next morning. It was easy with him. No drama, no complications. Just effortless friendship. His dad, though, that was a different story. I met Nathaniel Cole during our first winter break, when Jasper invited me home to escape the horror of dorm life. I didn't expect much, just a quiet week in a house that wasn't mine, maybe some awkward small talk with his family. But then I saw him, and something shifted. Nathaniel wasn't like the other dads I knew. He wasn't the type to slap you on the back or crack bad dad jokes. He was quiet, observant, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who made you feel like every word you said mattered. That first night, we sat around the fireplace while Jasper droned on about a ridiculous party we'd barely survived. I wasn't even paying attention, just nodding absently, pretending my pulse hadn't jumped when Nathaniel leaned forward to grab his glass of bourbon, the firelight casting shadows across his face. That was 3 years ago, and since then, I'd done everything in my power to ignore whatever this was. Now, as we unloaded the truck, I reminded myself that nothing had changed. I was just Jasper's best friend, and Nathaniel was just... Eli. I nearly dropped the toolbox I was pulling out of the back seat. Smooth. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow, arms crossed over his broad chest. You okay? Yeah, I just wasn't paying attention. I forced a casual shrug. What's up? His gaze lingered for a second before he nodded toward the cabin. Water heater's been acting up. Think you could take a look later? Yeah, of course. Appreciate it. His lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, but enough to make my stomach flip. I turned away quickly, hoping he hadn't noticed. Jasper, completely oblivious, stretched his arms over his head with a groan. I vote we don't do any actual work until tomorrow. Nathaniel snorted. And I vote you stop being lazy. Jasper grinned. Come on, Dad, it's our first night. Shouldn't we, have a welcome to the cabin beer first? Nathaniel sighed, but his eyes softened. One beer. Then you're helping me clean out the shed in the morning. Jasper hooped in victory and disappeared inside, leaving me alone with Nathaniel in the fading evening light. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I should have followed Jasper inside. Should have put distance between us before my thoughts spiraled into dangerous places. But then Nathaniel rolled up his sleeves, revealing the strong lines of his forearms. And just like that, I forgot how to move. "Looking forward to the week?" he asked, voice steady. "Nope, not at all. Not even a little." "Yeah, I lied. Should be good." Nathaniel nodded, but there was something in his expression, a knowing look like he could see right through me. Like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one struggling with this. The storm rolled in faster than expected. 1 minute, Jasper was laughing about burning dinner. His idea of grilling involved mostly setting things on fire. And the next, the sky cracked open with rain, heavy and relentless. The power flickered once, then cut out entirely. "Well, that's fantastic," Jasper muttered, holding up his phone flashlight like some kind of tragic explorer. "I guess we're doing this the old-fashioned way." Nathaniel didn't seem fazed. "There are candles and a backup generator in the shed." Jasper groaned. "Do we have to deal with this now? Can't we just ride out the night, like medieval peasants?" Nathaniel shot him a look. "Unless you want the pipes to freeze, yes, we have to deal with it now." Jasper groaned louder, dramatically dropping onto the couch. "Eli, buddy, best friend. Please go with him so I don't have to." I hesitated, but Nathaniel had already grabbed his jacket. "You coming?" It wasn't really a question. I nodded, ignoring the way my pulse kicked up as I followed him outside. The rain was merciless, soaking through my clothes instantly. The air smelled like wet earth and pine, and the wind cut through my hoodie, making me shiver. Nathaniel walked ahead, his broad frame moving easily through the downpour. By the time we reached the shed, I was freezing. Nathaniel shoved the door open, and we stepped inside, the small space illuminated only by his flashlight. Rain pounded against the roof, the wind howling through the cracks in the wooden walls. "Find a generator." "I'll grab the fuel," Nathaniel said, shaking rain from his hair. I tried to focus, but the space was too small. The air between us felt thick, charged with something I wasn't ready to name. My fingers trembled as I crouched, rummaging through old tools and spare parts. "You're shivering," Nathaniel said after a moment. "I'm fine." He didn't look convinced. Without a word, he pulled off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. I froze. His jacket was warm, heavy with a scent, wood smoke, cedar, something unmistakably him. I swallowed hard, gripping the fabric like it was the only thing grounding me. "Thanks," I murmured. Nathaniel nodded, but something in his gaze lingered. For a few minutes, we worked in silence, the sound of the storm swallowing everything else. But then Nathaniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I should have fixed this generator earlier." "It's not your fault." His jaw tensed. I should have been more prepared. There was something in his voice, something heavy. I knew Nathaniel took responsibility for everything, always carrying more than he needed to. "You can't control the weather," I said softly. His eyes met mine. Something unreadable passed between us. I looked away first. The tension was suffocating now, an unspoken thing between us pressing closer, demanding attention. The rain kept falling, the storm sealing us inside, and I felt everything, the heat of his jacket around me, the way our breaths echoed in the tight space, the weight of his gaze. And then, a loud crack. The wind slammed against the shed, rattling the door. Without thinking, I stumbled back, bumping into Nathaniel's chest. His hands caught my arms instantly, steadying me. I should have stepped away. I didn't. Neither did he. I could feel his breath near my ear, the slow rise and fall of his chest against my back. His fingers tightened just slightly, like he was holding himself back. Or maybe he wasn't. The air between us thickened. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I turned my head just enough to see him. Nathaniel's eyes were dark, unreadable, his expression locked in something careful, controlled, but his grip hadn't loosened, and neither of us moved. I should have stepped away. Every logical part of me screamed it, told me to put distance between us before this moment became something I couldn't take back. But I didn't move. Neither did Nathaniel. The rain hammered against the shed, drowning out everything but the sound of our breathing. His hands still lingered on my arms, firm but careful, like he wasn't sure if he was holding me in place or waiting for me to pull away. I turned slightly, just enough to catch the way his gaze flicked to my lips before he forced himself to look away. That single moment nearly shattered me. "You're shaking," he murmured. I couldn't tell if he meant from the cold or something else entirely. "I'm fine." My voice was hoarse, unsteady. Nathaniel exhaled sharply, his hands flexing before he finally let me go. The warmth of his touch faded instantly, and I had to bite my lip to stop myself from stepping back into it. "This is a bad idea," he muttered, running a hand through his damp hair. I swallowed hard. "What is?" He shot me a look, one that burned straight through me. "This." His voice was low, strained. "You. Me. Whatever the hell is happening right now." My stomach twisted. For 3 years, I told myself I was imagining things, that the way I felt about him was one-sided, that every lingering glance, every too long moment, every shift in the air between us was just my mind playing tricks on me. But it wasn't, and now I knew it wasn't just me. "You feel it too," I said before I could stop myself. Nathaniel tensed. "Eli, don't lie to me." I cut in. My voice was quiet, but my chest was pounding. "Please." He closed his eyes for half a second, like he was bracing himself. When he opened them again, they were unreadable, locked behind something carefully constructed. "This can't happen," he said, voice rough. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. "Why? You're my son's best friend." "And I'm not Jasper," I shot back. Nathaniel flinched just slightly. I swallowed down the lump in my throat, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "I'm not a kid. I'm not some mistake waiting to happen. I'm here. And you?" I hesitated, heart racing. "You want this too." He let out a slow, uneven breath. "That doesn't mean it's right." I stared at him, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Then tell me you don't want me. Tell me that I'm wrong, and I'll drop it." Silence. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. But he didn't say it. He couldn't. I took a slow step closer. "Say it," I whispered. His breath hitched. For a split second, I thought he might do it, might give me the out, tell me this was nothing, and let me walk away. But then, his restraint snapped. 1 second, we were standing in that thick, suffocating silence. The next, his hands were gripping my face, and his mouth was on mine. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was years of unspoken tension unraveling all at once. Heat and desperation, and something dangerously close to relief. I gasped against his lips, and he swallowed the sound, tilting my head back as his fingers slid into my hair. He kissed me like he was starving, like he'd been holding himself back for so long that it physically hurt to stop now. I pressed closer without thinking, fists tangling in the damp fabric of his shirt, my entire body humming with something I couldn't name. But then, just as quickly as he'd grabbed me, he tore himself away. I barely had time to catch my breath before he stepped back, hands clenched at his sides, chest heaving. His eyes were wild, conflicted. This was a mistake. I flinched, the words like a slap. Nathaniel dragged a hand over his face, breathing hard. "I can't, Jasper." He shook his head like he was trying to force logic back into place. "He trusts me." The lump in my throat burned. "And you think this would break that?" He didn't answer. "You think I'm a mistake?" My voice was quieter now, barely audible over the rain. Nathaniel's expression twisted, like he hated himself for this. "You know I don't." "Then what are you so scared of?" His eyes flicked to mine, and for a second, I saw it. Fear, uncertainty, longing. But then he straightened, shoulders squaring, like he was putting his walls back up. "This can't happen," he repeated. But this time, it sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. My chest ached. I swallowed hard, my pulse still frantic from the taste of him, the heat of his hands, the way he had grabbed me like he couldn't help himself. But if he wanted to push me away, I wasn't going to make it easy. I stepped forward, closing the space between us again, tilting my chin up just slightly. His breath hitched. "You kissed me," I murmured, "not the other way around." His jaw tightened. "Tell me you didn't want it," I whispered. "Tell me it meant nothing, and I'll walk out that door right now." More silence. Then, his fingers twitched, like he was about to reach for me before he forced them still. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, and his voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke. I can't. The confession cracked something in me, because I knew what it cost him to say it. I exhaled slowly, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then stop running. Nathaniel closed his eyes, his whole body tense, like he was fighting some impossible war within himself. And for the first time, I didn't know if he'd win, or if he'd finally let himself lose. Nathaniel didn't move, didn't speak, for a long, fragile moment. The only sound between us was the relentless drumming of the rain against the shed roof. His chest rose and fell unevenly, his hands still clenched at his sides like he was holding himself together by force. But I saw it, the way his resolve cracked, the way something inside him gave in even as he tried to fight it. I stepped closer, closing the last sliver of space between us. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the tension thrumming under his skin. My pulse was a wild, frantic thing in my throat, but I didn't back down. Neither did he. Eli, he said softly, almost like a warning. I didn't stop. Say you don't want me. His jaw tightened. Say it. He exhaled sharply, and then his fingers brushed against mine. Barely there, like he wasn't sure if he had permission, like he was still holding back. I turned my hand over, threading my fingers through his. That was it. That was all it took. A broken sound left his throat, and the next thing I knew, his arms were around me, pulling me against him like he couldn't bear the space between us anymore. His grip was desperate, unyielding, his hands pressing into my back like he was afraid I might slip through his fingers. I let out a shaky breath against his shoulder, my own hands fisting into the fabric of his shirt. I could feel the tension in him, the weight of everything he'd been holding back for so long. And I didn't want him to hold it back anymore. You don't have to fight this, I whispered. Nathaniel let out a slow, shuddering exhale, his forehead pressing against the side of my head. I don't know how not to. I pulled back just enough to look at him. His expression was raw, conflicted, but there was something else there too. Something softer. Something that made my chest ache. I reached up, fingertips brushing over the rough stubble on his jaw. He closed his eyes for a second, like he was soaking in the touch, memorizing it. When he opened them again, the storm outside had nothing on the one in his gaze. I tried to ignore this, he murmured. Tried to tell myself it was nothing. But every time you walked into a room, he swallowed hard. I knew I was lying to myself. My heart clenched. Then stopped. Nathaniel's breath stilled. I was giving him an out. A choice. For a second, I thought he might take it, might step back and lock this part of himself away again. But then, his hand came up to cradle the side of my face, his thumb brushing against my cheekbone. And he kissed me again. This time, it wasn't desperate. It wasn't rushed or frenzied. It was slow, deep, certain, like he was memorizing the feel of me, the taste of me. Like I want to make sure I knew this wasn't just heat or impulse. This was real. I melted into him, my hands sliding up his chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat under my palms. He groaned softly against my lips, and I swear I felt it everywhere. When we finally pulled back, we were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. This is reckless, he murmured. I huffed a quiet laugh. You think I care? His lips curved just barely. I reached for his hand again, threading our fingers together. This time, he didn't hesitate. For the first time since this whole thing started, Nathaniel didn't pull away. And neither did I. The storm had passed. The rain had softened into a quiet drizzle, tapping gently against the shed roof, but the air between us still crackled with something unspoken. Something new. Nathaniel hadn't let go of my hand. Not when we left the shed. Not when we trudged through the mud back to the cabin. Not even when Jasper greeted us with a flashlight and an exasperated, "Took you guys long enough." I was about to send out a search party. Nathaniel had only grunted in response, his fingers tightening around mine for half a second before finally, reluctantly, letting go. I felt the loss instantly. Now, hours later, the cabin was quiet. The power had come back, Jasper had gone to bed, and I was left alone in the dim glow of the fireplace, staring into the flames as my mind reeled. Nathaniel had kissed me. Twice. And neither time had felt like a mistake. The floor creaked behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Can't sleep either? Nathaniel's voice was low, rough around the edges. I shook my head. Too much to think about. He hesitated, then moved closer, settling onto the couch beside me. We sat there for a moment, side by side, the flickering light casting warm shadows across his face. Finally, I broke the silence. Are you going to pretend it didn't happen? Nathaniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I don't think I could if I tried. That admission sent something warm curling through my chest. I turned to look at him fully, studying the way his brows pulled together, the conflict still etched into his features. But beneath the hesitation, I saw something else. Something softer, something certain. I don't want to run from this, I admitted, my voice quiet but steady. I don't want to pretend it was nothing. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. Neither do I. The weight of those words settled between us, solid and real. I reached out, letting my fingers brush against his. His hand twitched, then flipped over, palm up, an invitation. I took it. I don't know what this means yet, he murmured. Or what comes next. I laced our fingers together. We figured out. Nathaniel looked at me, then really looked at me, and I could see it the moment he let himself believe it. The moment he let himself want this. A slow smile tugged at the corner of my lips. You're stuck with me now, you know. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, his own smile barely there, but there. Yeah, he said softly. I think I can live with that. And as we sat there, hands entwined, the fire crackling beside us, I knew. This wasn't just a moment. This was the beginning of something real.